We live in a beautiful world. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do.
Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Melissa Rebronja. I am an integrative healing practitioner and host at healyourheart.love. I am also a 6-2 manifestor off the roof. And today we have a very special guest, John Cole. Welcome, John.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So John is a 2-4 ego projector and also a human design analyst in private practice at Metamorphic Human Design.
Yes.
And also the co-founder of the Human Design Collective with his partner, Amy Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And John and I met I Googled Chiron return in human design, and I came across your wonderful article that was very helpful. And then I booked you for a reading. And we did that about a year ago now, and it was great.
Yeah, time flies. And I remember that. That was a lot of fun.
It was. So I would love to know a little bit about how you got into human design yourself, and then how you ended up being an analyst.
Yeah, I came into human design from astrology originally. I'd been studying astrology for years, gone through different astrological systems, trying different systems to see what really worked, what resonated with me, and had been kind of in and out of astrology for a couple decades when a friend of mine who's another astrologer kind of threw human design into my lap and said, have you seen this system? It's based on your birth time, place, date of birth. And it's kind of interesting. It's like astrology, but it's showing something else, and kind of dropped it in my lap and then said, check this out. And I started looking into it and found out pretty quickly that I was a projector by work type, which really resonated with me at the time. It kind of made sense and reframed a lot of my experiences. And that was enough to get me just to dive in even further and to start taking classes. I got a reading, started researching it, doing self-study as well, but just kept going deeper and deeper into the system, and eventually entered into a formal training process, which was a 2-year analyst training program where they basically train you to do readings, cycle readings like the Chiron return, foundation readings, partnership readings. And it just kind of took over. And that's what I'm doing full time now, that and teaching classes in human design.
Very cool. Awesome. And you teach classes at the Human Design Collective.
I do. I co-teach with my partner, Amy Lee, and we offer the 3 foundational courses in human design, which kind of lays out the basic or general education in that system. And then we offer some kind of other workshops, and then a kind of advanced training that comes after that called the Living Your Design Guide training program as well.
Great. And what is that? Like the Living Your Design Guide training?
The Living Your Design is the name of the first official course that's taught in human design. It's in the form of a workshop, which takes you through kind of you could say the basic terminology, kind of frames out the system. It's an introduction, kind of a formal introduction into that framework, a way of looking at things, the language. And it's basically you could say kind of an exercise in relating it to one's personal life, like figuring out like, how does this map that we're using in human design relate to my daily lived experience? And that can be offered in kind of a workshop format, as I mentioned. And so the Living Your Design Guide training program prepares people to offer that workshop themselves. So we're kind of training people to do
Got it.
that first class and workshop.
Wonderful. Awesome. And I am curious, when it comes to business and human design, is that a different training? Is that something you have or you're interested in?
Yeah, there is a branch of human design. It's referred to as BG5, which I think stands for Business Group 5, because it's based on how we work together in small groups, like teams of 3, 4, and 5 people. And it's really the same knowledge, the same information that's been repackaged with, I would say, more business friendly terminology and language around it. and some of the concepts are presented a little bit differently. But there's a whole branch of human design that really looks at kind of the business application of that knowledge. I don't have a lot of experience or training in that, although the human design system itself in its kind of original form can tell us a lot about those type of things for us personally through kind of the lens of the individual.
Thank you. I was just curious about that one because I'm seeing it and just wanted to ask an analyst what your opinion was on that. Cool. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
And John, where are you located?
I am in Wimberley, Texas, a small town about 45 minutes outside of Austin.
Cool. What is the Chiron return? And what does it signify in human design?
In human design, the Chiron return mostly refers to, you could say, a certain timing of the life. It's a time that we all get to in our late 40s and early 50s, when it's generally held that that's the time of our kind of full unfolding or flowering of our life, our role, our purpose. And the Chiron return is an astrological, you could say, timing marker that carries a certain symbolism for that time, but it's something that kind of triggers the entry into the third phase of life, where we've kind of lived on the planet long enough. We're full adults, in theory. And so the Chiron return kind of represents the themes, the people, the energies that we're here to meet during that entry into that third phase of life. And then there's a lot of astrological kind of symbolism behind it in terms of what Chiron as a body in the solar system. It's kind of this interesting body that defies classification from like astronomers. They say it's a planet, it's a planetoid, it's a comet, but it's a whole bunch of things. It's kind of a synthesis of things in a way, and you can see that in terms of its symbolism as well. So I could go on, but the basic idea is it's talking about the life's timing in a sense.
Absolutely. And what I liked about your article is that you related Chiron return to line 6. Only line 6 go off the roof. Are only line 6 the ones that would benefit from a Chiron return reading, or is that all across all profiles?
I think it's across all profiles. It certainly has been in my experience as a 2-4 profile. So I don't have, I only have 2 6 lines in my design. So I don't have a lot of, personal resonance with the 6 line. But the Chiron return does carry a very special significance for those who have a 6 line in their profile. Because as you say, it represents this coming off the roof time, where if we take a couple of steps back, if you have a 6 line in your profile, there's a very distinct kind of 3-phase life process, relatively speaking, where the first 30 years that run from the birth to the time of the Saturn return around 28, 29, 30, there's kind of excuse me, there's more of a third line experience going on with that 6 line. The 6 line is not really stepping into its role model kind of frequency yet, which is really what the main keynote for the 6 line is being a living example of something, a role model. But that first third of life, it's almost like they're here to go through just a lot of experimentation, trial and error, and just kind of gaining life experience in that first 30 years. And then what happens at the time of the Saturn return is there's this on the roof process that starts, where the individual withdraws, relatively speaking, to some degree from society and kind of pulls back to work on themselves, to develop their awareness, to kind of figure out really who they are, what their life is about. And that's a 20-year period that runs from 29 to 49 roughly. And then at the time of the Chiron return, 49, that's the signal or the timing that the individuals to re-enter back into the world fully, but to do it as this living example, this role model, this person who's kind of showing us what it means to be a unique, differentiated human being, and in whatever themes or whatever context that they're designed to do that. And so the Chiron return is really special. It's very significant for 6 lines, but I do feel like it's relevant and it holds up for all of us.
Cool. So I had a reading a year ago, and I think I remember you saying that it's a 3-year process. Is that correct? So getting off the roof? Because I had the exact date, which was like May, of last year. And I was like, okay, I'm off the roof. So I'm 1 year into it. And it does feel like a process. So is that correct to say it's a 3-year process?
I really do think it's a process. And that's the feedback I hear and get from a lot of people who are going through that personally, is that even though we can narrow it down to a certain date and time, which would be the exact day that Chiron goes all the way around the 360-degree wheel, the zodiac, and returns to the place where it was when we were born, we can mark that in time and space. But like life itself, everything does it's a process. It's an unfolding. It's a transitionary time where I feel like there's kind of like a 3-year on-ramp of preparing to come off the roof, where you start feeling that shift or transition coming. And then you get to the actual event, to that date. And then it's still a process of integrating that, coming off the roof. And so I've heard people say that it can take them even more. It could take them as long as 7 years to fully get off the roof. But I think it's
interesting. Okay, that's good to know.
Kind of so no hurry,
Right. Yeah. So
time, which is actually an interesting point, because I think that's one of the things that human design can show us as a framework or a way of looking at things, is that there is an unfolding, there's a timing to the life, and that it's often kind of brushed aside, like, well, why is this not happening yet, or when is this going to happen? And things happen in their own time, and it's usually a process, like you said. So there's kind of a building up to it, then there's usually some sort of shift, and then there's that integration on the other side.
Right. Yeah, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about life cycles. And you do readings on each one of them. It's like a different one. So there's the Saturn return, Uranus opposition. Is that how you say it?
Yep, exactly.
And then the Chiron return. Is it true that, I guess, people should do these like at the time that it's happening?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I feel like people often we want to know, we want to have information, we want a point of reference. And so it's very common that people will come in before these cycles, and like they can see their Saturn return coming, or their Uranus opposition is a couple of years out, and they want to know about it, what to expect, or what's happening, or maybe they're already starting to feel aspects of it. And you're looking for a point of reference or some context. And it can show us that, but it's usually once you've gone through it and you get to the other side that it all starts making more sense, because you can sit there and describe the landscape, the territory, which is what we do when we're doing one of these cycle readings, but you may not have that point of reference yet, or it may not land yet, because it's still unfolding or still in process. And so I think by the time you get a couple years on the other side of a cycle, it does start to make more sense. But there's often, I think, some value in just understanding that there is a bigger framework, a bigger timing, a bigger picture that's in play. And that's kind of what the life story is about, looking at all of these cycles and these major life transitions in a larger context of the life from birth to death. And then you can kind of get a sense of the themes and where you're going to be. And it gets really interesting when you see this stuff start landing 50 years into the process. And
right, yeah. Well, I'd love to hear just a little snippet of each one of these life cycles, if you're open to sharing, like just for people that are new to it, and why. So for example, the first one is the Saturn return. So does that happen at age 27, 28?
28, 29.
Okay, 28, 29.
It varies a little bit depending on where Saturn was when you were born in your birth chart, whether it was going forward or retrograde. So it's going to happen a little bit at a different time for each person, but usually around 29. And it's that first life cycle that kind of kicks everything off. It's the Saturn return is said to be a completion of the first full developmental cycle we have as humans, like of stepping into adulthood. It's kind of interesting too, because we often put a lot of pressure on ourselves or our kids or whomever to figure things out in our late teens and early 20s. But from the point of view of astrology and human design and these type of systems, we're really not in a place to realize that or to really kind of know what that means until we get into our early 30s. And so the Saturn return really represents this movement into adulthood, where we start taking responsibility for ourselves, and we realize, like, all right, there's something here for me to do. There's maybe a greater purpose to this life. And so that's kind of the general feeling or the atmosphere of the Saturn return. And in what I would say is, if the person is relatively in alignment, in terms of like honoring their design or living according to their true nature, operating in a way that is healthy or in alignment with them, then the Saturn return can be a kind of a supportive time where you come in and you start, getting real. You start like doing things that are longer lasting, or things that, carry more weight in the life. But each of these major cycles, like the Saturn return, the Uranus opposition, and the Chiron return, if you look at them as a whole, they can be kind of checkpoints in the life, or opportunities to course correct in a way. So if you get to your Saturn return or your Uranus opposition, and let's say your life path is kind of going this way, but you're over here, you're way off in a way. That's when we hear things, the stories of like the midlife crisis that's sometimes associated with the Uranus opposition in the early 40s, or people start telling these Saturn return horror stories, like, oh my gosh, my Saturn return, I went through so much. I see those as course corrections. Like, it's the universe, if you wanted to talk about it that way, the cosmos, the planets, whatever, nature's trying to get us back to ourselves and get us back on track. And so the Uranus opposition comes along in the early 40s, usually 42, but 41, 42, 43. And that's another big life checkpoint. And it's a time, I think, that we really step into our individuality. We differentiate ourselves. We say, this is what makes me unique, or this is what it means to be me. And it can be challenging at that time to stay in things that have been compromising to us, or we feel like, this is no longer working for me. I was doing this for a while, but I can't do it anymore. And so you see those type of course corrections there with the Uranus opposition as well.
Yeah, the mini version of my understanding is that the Uranus opposition around 42, you almost kind of have some dark nights of the soul where you're questioning everything that you're doing. Is that correct interpretation?
Yeah, it very much can be like that, where it's like, if you're kind of, it's a funny thing to say, but if you're in alignment, or you're really kind of honoring what, your needs or who you are or whatever it is, then the Uranus opposition can come along, and it can be kind of this supportive, empowering energy, almost like, just you do you more, you be more you really individuate. But let's say you're in a job or a career that's just done, it's not working for you anymore. That's usually when, you will go through a big, potential crisis or dark night of the soul, and like, all right, well, I have to change, a lot about what I'm doing, or my life is going to have to change in some pretty dramatic ways. And so you can see that as well.
Yeah, thank you. I know somebody that committed suicide at 42. So can it get so dark that you're unable to make the transition?
Yeah, it does for some people.
Right.
And I think it's generally a challenging time for most people, one way or the other, even if it doesn't have to be a big crisis for some. There's a lot that's happening astrologically at that time. It's not just Uranus going 180 degrees around the wheel, which is the Uranus opposition. It's like halfway around its orbit. And we also see a nodal shift, like where we shift from the south node to the north node. And that can often represent a stepping out of our comfort zone, or kind of going into a different environment, or a different way of being in the world that isn't familiar, that's going to be messy. You're going to have to go through a lot of learning, or trial and error. So there's a lot going on at that time. And I think if the person has that ability to adapt, or the right supports in place, then it doesn't have to be that big of a deal, but it can be.
Right. So it's like a testing time. It could be a testing time of sorts.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Things get real.
Right. Yeah. And things get real fast.
Yes, they do.
Yeah. Incarnation crosses, do you do those types of readings as well?
Yep, that's part of the analyst training, and I'm glad you brought that up, because if we're talking about the life story and these different cycles, one of the ways I see it and I frame it is that all of this is in support of us living out our cross, our incarnation cross, which in human design is, describing the themes, almost a type of mythology or story that we're here to live out over the course of our life. If we're going to fulfill our purpose, play our role as if we were a character in a play or a movie, these would be the thematics. This is what it would look like. Here are the signposts. And so the Saturn return, Uranus opposition, and Chiron return, I see as being in support of the development or the fulfillment and the expression of the incarnation cross. It's just getting us closer to that when we hit our third phase of life in the 50s and onward. And so the themes that come in with these cycles, like the Saturn return or Uranus opposition, are the things that we're here to meet, learn about, go through, develop, so that we can live out that incarnation cross.
I remember reading that Ra was reluctant to even share about incarnation crosses, because it is kind of like, oh, my true purpose, please do share. Also, it's something that people that are older, maybe from 42 up, should be more concerned, or late 30s, if that's my understanding. So when should one consider getting a incarnation cross reading?
It's generally held in human design that we plant. That's kind of the language that's sometimes used. We plant our cross at the Saturn return. So once we hit our 30s, then we can start getting a sense of, okay, there is something more there. Maybe there is a purpose, or I feel a certain kind of resonance with these thematics that are, showing up in the incarnation cross. And so once we get to our 30s, then it seems like it becomes more of a reality for us, more of a possibility or potential for us. But I think Ra's caution there was that most of the time what we'll do is we'll take it immediately, think like, okay, how do I do this? How do I become this?
Yeah.
And it goes like straight into the realm of the mind, and like, okay, let me get like either strategic or more manipulative about how can I, game this system in a way.
Right. It's very human, right, to do that.
It's extremely human, and human design is actually kind of pointing us in the other direction. It's pointing us to form consciousness or form intelligence, and it's saying the thing that we can do the most to live our cross out, if that's our goal or our purpose, is to operate correctly, which means follow our strategy and authority, follow our own inner truth or knowing, or the clarity of our experience, so that we can meet life and meet it in a way as ourselves. And then the incarnation cross just basically becomes something that at some point we look around, we're like, oh, this is what's happening. This is just describing where I'm at right now, or what's, the kind of the role and the place that I am. And so it's kind of said that we don't really do our cross, but our cross does us, meaning like if we're living as ourselves, the cross will just take us over at some point, and then we realize, oh, this is just my life. And so I think Ra was he saw people hearing about the cross, and go, oh, I want to know my purpose. And then it would be another thing that the mind would grab onto and hold on to, and then try to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's good to know. I haven't had that done yet, and would definitely consider doing a incarnation cross reading. And it's good to know that people can do it from their Saturn return onwards.
Usually at that point on, it starts making more sense. I've done sessions with teenagers and people in their early 20s, and sometimes I'll just start talking about the cross just to see, does this land, or how much of this is in play right now, and usually not a lot at that point.
That's interesting.
But then you get into your 40s or 50s, and you usually know what we're talking about.
Right. So other than the main book, The Science of Differentiation, where you just kind of get like a little summary. And I know there's another book that is a presentation by Ra, where he went through all the crosses. But again, it's like not relatable at all. It's just like mumbo jumbo in a way. So it would be helpful to get a reading to actually understand. How do you do those readings? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's a bit like being in the role of a map reader or an interpreter, kind of a translator. So, if you understand the mechanics and what's important, and you've got kind of the points of reference, the keynotes, then it's really kind of describing a map, and there's certain things that we emphasize. We're mostly looking at the incarnation itself, the incarnation cross itself is made of the sun and earth on both the personality, the black side of the chart, and the sun and the earth on the design, the red side of the chart. And if you looked at it in the wheel, in the zodiac or the rave mandala, it looks almost like a 90-degree cross, but it's 88
Right.
degrees. So it's
Right.
slightly offset.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is the main focus. We start talking about the sun and the earth on both sides, and the themes, the gates, the hexagrams, the lines. But then we also look at the nodes, the environmental changes that happen as part of the life story as well. And then you can kind of go into, more subtlety, more detail as you kind of tie it into the overall chart as a whole. Like, okay, this is a chart of a manifestor, or this is a chart of a projector. It's going to play out in a very different way. But like you said, the information that's out there from Ra is mostly in the form of transcripts, where he's just kind of, unloading and just getting this
Yeah.
information
Yeah.
out. And
Yeah.
it's not always easy to understand, read, or it's not always well structured. So
Right.
the job of a good analyst is to do that translation and to say, okay, within the context of this chart, this person's life, these thematics, like let's talk about the potential or the possibility here.
Anything else that you'd like to share that we haven't covered yet, that you'd like people to know about you and your work and what you're excited about in human design?
You know what I really like the most in human design is, well, this is probably part of being a projector. Projectors tend to be very, personal, one-on-one focused, like just really wanting to kind of to get into it with another person and have a kind of an exchange. And in the context of human design, I really like the process of just kind of sitting down with someone and having this map in front of me and basically translating this in a way, speaking to it, and then seeing it reflected back in the person, or what they share in their stories, or to seeing it kind of land and it comes to life in a way. And then usually what happens is that the person on the receiving end feels kind of seen or recognized on a certain level, and even kind of validated. Like a lot of the things that we feel are potential problems or a lack that we have, or maybe there's something, quote unquote, wrong with us. Once you look at it through the lens of human design, in a way, it tells you why things are the way they are, what it's for, when it's going to work, when it's not going to work, what things are designed to be consistent and reliable in one's life, what things are conditional or they're changing. And so when you go through that process with someone, there can be a kind of a sense of relief almost, or just kind of a, okay, then maybe I'm all right. Maybe I'm not broken. Maybe there's, the things that I thought were
Right.
problems aren't really the problems. And so that's probably what I like the most is that kind of personal exploration together.
Yeah, beautiful. I do have one more question.
Okay.
Do you think that human design came in place of astrology? Like,
Mhm.
so in some ways, like, is human design more relevant than astrology?
I actually work with both. I still use astrology and I'll reference it. But it's interesting. When I started, I'd come from astrology, and I had kind of had an off and on relationship with it because I felt it was doing certain things really well, and there were certain things I could go to it for, and it was reliable. And then other things I was just like, I'm not getting traction here. It's not landing. There's something else. There's something missing. So human design comes into my life and was a bit of a missing puzzle piece, or it kind of connected the dots in a way, and it framed things
Oh.
out in a way that I had never been able to do through astrology.
Mm.
There's a lot of information. There's a lot to explore in there. And human design is, on a certain level, it's an astrological based system. But I feel like what Ra did, who's the person who brought human design out into the world, he was kind of an essentialist and a universalizer. He was here to get this message out. And he borrowed some things from astrology. There were some things that carried over from astrology, but he also eliminated a lot and like kind of just simplified things. And so a lot of people coming into human design will look at it and go, wow, this is really complicated. This is really complex. And it is, it's true. But compared to astrology, I find it very simple to work with. Like astrology is so open-ended, and depending on what technique, system, tool, or interpretation you're using, it could go a lot of different ways. And human design, it just cuts right through it. It's more immediate. I think it's pretty practical, tends to be fairly universal. And so I don't know that it's here to replace astrology in any way, but I think it certainly is something, an evolution of it, or another expression of a type of astrology that I feel like it came into the world at this time because we need it. It was on some level like, we need this information. It's almost like having an operator's manual for yourself and this body, and this form, and this consciousness. And astrology, on the other hand, has been around for as long as we've been looking at the skies, you know, as humans. So I feel like it did come in for a specific reason or purpose, which I think might be to get us through these transitionary times that we're in. So that remains to be seen. But if nothing else, it's a nice complement to astrology. What's interesting is, you know, when we talk about astrology, you know, I have to take it back to like the essence of it. It's like we're talking about our relationship with the solar system. We're talking about the relationship between the sun and the moon, or the sun through the seasons and through, you know, the equinox and the solstice, and, you know, and we have a relationship with the planets, we always have. And I see that as like, that's astrology. It's fundamental to what it means to be on this earth and have our relationship with the cosmos. But what I think comes up a lot is that people take that information and they use it in a certain way. They're using it to try to get something, to achieve something, to and maybe more of a kind of strategic or manipulative way. I want this, so I'm going to use this to get that. And human design is not really about that. It's a big distinction, I think, in what would be considered coming from a 7-centered kind of way of being, which is the world that we existed in, you know, up until about the 1700s, until we get into, you know, our current times. We're in these 9-centered forms. That's the way it's talked about in human design. We've got these upgraded vehicles, these bodies that have different sophistication, greater capabilities. They're more complex. And human design is really being offered as something of an operator's manual, or a guide to how do we operate these new 9-centered forms. And the game kind of changes in a way. It's no longer about the survival and manipulation of our environment, even though we still see those themes in our world because they're carried over from the old ways of doing things. And I think from that point of view, you know, astrology, if it's being used in that old way, it's going to feel kind of clunky, weird, and out of date. But there are astrologers out there who are not really using it in that way. And again, these are just systems, they're frameworks, they're tools. And kind of like picking up any tool or instrument, it depends what we're doing with it and how we're holding it and using it.
Absolutely. Thank you. Tell me a little more about your 2 websites and what you'd like people to know about them. So the first one is Metamorphic Human Design.
Yes, that's my personal website, metamorphichumandesign.com. And that's where I have my information up for the sessions that I offer. I do foundation readings, incarnation cross readings, partnership connection readings, cycle readings. Also just kind of coaching, like freeform, you know, human design based kind of coaching or integration sessions. And so everything is up there, and you can book the sessions online there if you're interested, or you can email me from there if you have questions. And then I have another site that I run with my partner, Amy Lee, the humandesigncollective.com. And that's where we have our course offerings and our workshop offerings. We're usually running courses on an ongoing basis. Throughout the year, we teach the 3 basic foundation courses I mentioned. We have a couple other things that we do, but that's the course site, and we have all the information there on the courses and ability to register. And then we have kind of a community, a private community site that's associated with that, which we offer to our students just as a way of connecting with each other, or it's kind of a Facebook alternative. If you want to connect with
Oh,
people off
cool.
of Facebook
Nice.
or wherever else, then that's something that comes along with it. But those are the two places to find me. And then we have a podcast as well that we do through the
Oh,
Human
cool.
Design Collective. And we started that a couple of years ago because we just wanted to talk to people who have been doing this for a while. So we got our teachers from our training on there, our mentors, other people that we've found interesting, doing interesting things out there in the human design world. We brought in some astrologers, and so there's a lot of interesting content up there at the Human Design Collective podcast.
Oh, cool. Thank you for sharing that. And I'll post all the links for these websites and how to contact you. Well, thank you so much, John. It was lovely to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and love the questions. It's a great topic.
Yeah, would love to have you back sometime in the future. Thank you.